Grab your coffee, grab your tea, and come back, please. To the IL volunteers, can I request you to usher people back into the room and get the doors? We need to start. All right. Please settle down. Please take your seats. Clearly the lunch was great. You didn't want to come back. And we've had quite a few people leave, it looks like. Well, that's to be expected. Good lunch. And then get to work or get to wherever else you need to go to. All right, so we are ready to resume the post-lunch session. And I just wanted to remind you that morning was spent in really talking about what I would call the demand-side factors. Yeah, what is human centricity? How do you shape jobs? How do you use technology to make sure that the humanity is not lost? And so on and so forth. The afternoon session is, in a way, more the supply-side enablers as I think about it. So the first discussion right now is going to begin with a presentation by Professor David James. Professor James is Professor of Sociology of Education at the Cardiff University and one of the key collaborators in this research program. In his presentation, he is going to examine how education can be aligned with the evolving job market, very important topic in my view, including the impact of initiatives like MOOCs and microcredentials. How do you come up with a model that is adaptable in a changing world? What is the impact of digital technologies and their potential for inclusive education? So a pretty vast topic and a very pertinent one. So may I invite you up, Professor James, for your presentation.
Thank you for your time. I hope you had a lovely lunch. Clearly some people are still eating or deciding that eating is the best thing to do with the rest of the day. So they've decided not to join us, but that's fine. I want to say a few things about the tricky problems around education and lifelong learning as regards this broader and complex agenda that we're struggling with and trying to understand. As we know, as we've been saying, it's rapidly evolving. Okay, so a reimagination of education and lifelong learning is the thing that I'd like to focus on for the fourth industrial revolution. There's a proposal here, really, which is another way of putting the aim of the session. And it is moving away from a skills accumulation model towards a growth capability model. This isn't just about the shape of the curriculum or how we train teachers or adult educators. It's actually about how we think of the relationship between education, learning and work in a more rounded sense. Why should we do this? Well, I'll remind you of a couple of things you've heard about earlier. Absolutely crucial insights from the research program that you've been hearing about. One of these is job scarcity, and one of the outcomes of the great expansion of that was driven by the knowledge economy and also mainstream human capital kind of assumptions is that in many countries the supply of well-qualified graduates now far outstrips the availability of the sorts of jobs that they would perhaps have a right to expect. And, you know, perhaps a slightly flippant way of putting this is that there is an awful lot of would-be barristers who are now baristas. Okay? But that's not the end of the story, because the people who would once have been the baristas are now not doing anything, or they're doing jobs that they really don't want to do. In other words, bumping down. There's an effect on everyone from this, not just the people that were aiming to be the barristers. So I think that's the first thing, job scarcity. There's a little bit of feedback on this microphone. I wonder if we could sort that. Thank you very much. There's also global recognition of need, which I think is a real issue here. So organisations that really think quite hard about these issues are giving us powerful signals in the last few years. And here I'm thinking of OECD, for example, who've said the nature of work and the world of work and also life in general is changing so fast that we need a different approach to lifelong learning than the sort of habitual approach. We need something that's more of an ecosystem or a system approach, at least, which is driven by, you know, some sort of principles, in which, for example, governments and businesses and other groups actually contribute to supporting workers, people who are confronting all sorts of changes. This is a message that's also backed now by the World Economic Forum. And something very similar also comes from the International Labour Organization. So there's a sort of a consensus emerging there, which people have really studied quite hard, and I think those are worth taking note of. There are also, linked to what I was saying earlier, there's plenty of evidence of the decline in the returns on higher education, if I can put it that way. The investment in higher education, of course, is enormous, not only from societies but also from individuals. And although the proportions of that investment vary from country to country, what one can say is that the returns on investment in higher education are declining. They are partly, well, there's many reasons for it. I won't go into them here, but there's plenty of research demonstrating that feature, and it's a very important part of the context here. And then finally, there's a lot of deep and rapid digital change going on, but there's also a problematic belief. We've heard about it earlier today a little bit, which is a belief that somehow technology will solve all of our problems. You know, I've heard this so many times, and it's true that sometimes technology does solve some problems, of course, but to have it as a sort of mantra, which is how it sometimes comes across, I think is problematic. Okay, so we want to suggest that a different starting point is necessary. I want to suggest that you can summarize slightly crudely, the different strategies that you see around in different countries. We'll come back to this point later. You can contrast a strategic approach to skills accumulation, characterized by skills accumulation, with the second one there, a growth capability development. And you can see there's an attempt to describe these. The first is really an attempt to respond to markets, and there's a direct response there to operate with a banking model of accumulating skills across working lives, and that there's a slight problem with the fragmentation that you've heard Phil and others talk about earlier. You could contrast that with an attempt to steer markets. And to steer can include, we would argue, the operation towards a growth model of strengthening expertise across working lives. And this resists the unbundling and the fragmentation. You can see at the bottom of this, too, that we've thought about how that links to technology strategies and also has different anticipated outcomes. And I think, at least as a starter for thinking, it's quite a useful contrast. What about what we see around us in responses to rapid digital transformation and change? Well, we can characterize some of these as conventional. And by conventional, I'm not saying they're bad or even undesirable, actually. I think that's a separate question and a contextual question. What I am saying is that they're conventional. They're the things we reach for at the moment. We characteristically would often seek, I think, at the moment to get better labour market information. In many countries, there's well-established systems of surveying employers, anticipatory kind of systems, to try to fine-tune the supply of skills. Now, that's never been all that efficient, but in a world in which some of the jobs weren't even in existence 2 years ago, or where the way in which people work changes so rapidly, that's a little bit of a declining resource, I would suggest, for most of us in most countries. It's becoming less efficient, perhaps by the day. And there's some very interesting research on this, which I won't go into here, which suggests, I will tell you what it suggests. It suggests that employer surveys, if you do them more intelligently, do indicate a rise in uncertainty, which is not the same thing as indicating that some jobs will disappear in the next 10 years, but a rise in uncertainty, which is itself quite scary, actually. Some very sophisticated work has shown that. So we can run faster, we can invest in the training of more software engineers, so that we're more ready in that sense, more digitally prepared. We can offer tech professionals, incentives to go and work in schools. We can get more coding into the school curriculum, more into programs for adult learners. These are all possibilities. And of course, at firm level, we can automate and then reskill as a response to the new needs that throws up. These are all conventional responses. And like I say, I'm not saying they're bad. We kind of have to do them at the moment. I'm saying that they're all around us, because I want to highlight the possibility of unconventional or less conventional responses, some of which we've come across in our programme. So I'll give you a couple of examples briefly. Here's one. This is a very well-known global corporation where there's a realization that came through in our interview and also elsewhere that listening and responding to consumers and their needs and their desires in this highly competitive industry is now really the only source of edge, of competitive edge. That you've got to listen harder and respond quickly. Interesting, because this wonderful interviewee went on to describe what a difficult time he'd had recently. Okay, and The problem was that conventional recruitment of design engineers in this situation from elite universities was no longer serving this need very well. There's a long tradition of, very, very sort of hierarchical educational programs leading to recruitment into these jobs. So sometimes highly qualified and very talented design engineers lack empathy with ordinary consumer experience, he said. The solution, which he devised, was to hire a small number of mid-career people from non-elite universities with relevant design engineering experience, but equally important, varied life experiences and the capacity to actually empathize, empathy with consumers, and that these would augment the design and production teams. It was a success. But he told us then about the headache of getting it through HR, getting it through some of his senior colleagues, getting approval, essentially, to do this, how difficult it was to do. And I think there's a lot you can take from that example. It's a very telling example. More briefly, I want to say that we've looked at a whole series of different kinds of firms and heard about a whole variety of activities. But there are many examples out there of employers, as I'm sure you know, investing in the elements of their workforce and seeing it as a worthwhile thing to do, even when it's not directly linked to, say, their current tasks, or even when it's not linked in any sort of direct way to increases in productivity. The benefits, of course, include things like rewarding and hanging on to people, loyalty, building a community of people feeling that the firm is somewhere they belong. And I did just want to say that we've also seen quite a number of examples of where learning has become or is seen as part of the culture, part of the DNA, the fundamental DNA of the company, and seen as important as well. So what about turning some of those sorts of ideas into a growth capability model in practice? I just want to say briefly that we look, in order to understand this, we have to, I think, look a little bit at some of the big ideas about these sorts of issues that people have thought hard about before. And I'll just say that, amongst those would definitely be the capability thinkers, particularly Sen, the Indian philosopher, who, as I'm sure you know, was the main architect of the United Nations Development Index, which has been running about, over 30 years now. So that report is still important. But also people like Martha Nussbaum and Gilbert Ryle. For example, jumping to the bottom here, Ryle's analysis, very, very helpful. This dates from about 1945, quite a long time. But Ryle questions our ready assumption that knowing and doing are different things. You know, that Cartesian notion that you think stuff and then you enact it in a sort of crude model. In fact, very few things like that, especially things we do every day. If you drove a car like that, I think we'd all be in trouble. We don't. We do call back on those ideas. And we've come up with a few principles. There are about 9 of them. Here are just 3 examples of how you can conceive of a lifelong learning system, actually, that's driven by principles of capability and growth. And those are just 3 examples. I wanted to mention that one of the problems we face here, of course, is that even educational institutions are quite conservative the world over. They have lots of practices and interests that are already bedded down. It's quite difficult to change that kind of thing, certainly not quickly. And we must always keep that in mind here, I think. I wanted to say that part of the idea of reintegrating knowing and doing, which you heard about earlier briefly, is there's a very interesting interaction here with AI and machine learning, actually. Because even already some of the examples we've heard about require, if one is serious about incorporating AI into a process, you really have to, you can't just tag it on, you can't bolt it on. You have to reconsider the core purposes and the core roles that are already in operation in order to make anything work. And that's quite a task, actually, thinking that hard about your purpose. And I thought the contribution earlier about how purposes can vary. They're not always, how can we squeeze more profit out of the next 3 weeks? They are sometimes, how can we serve a particular vision better, or a particular need? So what we're unpacking is that a capabilities and growth model of lifelong learning, which includes schooling, of course, must reconsider such matters as the curriculum. And of course, implied in that is the assessment regime. Assessment drives an immense amount of behaviour all the time, of those who teach and those who learn. And perhaps we're talking about not just a broad initial curriculum, but as it says towards the bottom of this slide, a wide range of expansive learning opportunities, which includes interdisciplinarity. The real world isn't broken into academic disciplines, is it? So interdisciplinarity, project work, problem solving, these are ideas that educationalists and those who think about learning seriously have thought about for quite some time. And I would include in that, by the way, a fabulous project IAL are managing at the moment, called The Future of Pedagogic Practice, or FOP. Do have a look at that. So we are serious about finding ways of doing this, not only in work, but through education systems, and we do have some suggestions about how that might be done. I suppose a couple of slides to finish. It's gone red, so I'm suitably intimidated. This continuum you've seen before at the top of this slide here, from a skills accumulation, or if you like, banking model, through to capability accumulation and growth. Our data would suggest that, at least crudely, you can position essentially where some countries are nationally, national strategies. Not to say that all the individuals or the organisations are in those places, but there does seem to be the case that the US and the UK are sort of at the far end of one end of that continuum, that Finland and Germany are pretty much towards the other end, for a variety of contextual and interesting reasons, and that probably Singapore and South Korea really do have a foot in both camps. There are aspects of the society, the institutions, the policy, which you can see both of those things going on. And I think that's a signal for an opportunity as much as anything. My conclusion deliberately combines something one of our respondents said with a general statement that I have taken from our research. So, firstly, here's one of our respondents, a country manager in Vietnam of a multinational social enterprise. And what she says, as a mother of a 15-year-old, I'm going to read it out. I've been thinking about her future. Things like generative AI cannot solve problems that humans created, like global warming or like trust. You can use it to a certain extent, but in the end we have to find a way to solve our own problems. We just need to be more human than ever before, number one. I thought it was a very, very interesting comment. And I've just put that next to where I end up with this, which is to say that our research leads us to rethink education and lifelong learning for the digital age, so that it supports learning, innovation and creativity for a human-centric future, and serves the long-term interests not only of any one section, but citizens, the species, the planet, and of course those of capital. We've got to somehow find a way of serving all of those needs better and at the same time. Thank you.
Why don't you take a seat here? Yeah. David, thank you so much. That was truly thought-provoking. Moving from what you call the banking model to the growth model, actually, I think calls for a huge transformation in the way we deliver education. From being functionally siloed to more holistic and integrated. And I know some educational institutions have tried experiments, but it hasn't become mainstream as yet. Maybe it's the need of the hour now. Very good. So the third panel discussion going to be led by Dr. Berlin Tran. Dr. Berlin, he's a lecturer at the International School of Business, University of Economics, Ho Chi Minh. And he'll be joined by our other two panelists, Dr. Ga Woon Ban, who's a senior research fellow at the Korea Research Institute of Education and Training, and a visiting senior at the London School of Economics. Tan Li Sheng, Director for Higher Education Planning Office at the Ministry of Education. And we will be joined remotely by Raquel Broman, who is the head of training at AI Sweden. She's going to be on, right? Raquel? Okay, there she is. All right, over to you, Berlin. All yours. No mic? Use this.
Okay, it's on now. Cheers. Raquel, can you see and hear us clearly?
Yes.
Okay, cheers. Good. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Berlin. Strange name, I know. There's a story behind it. I won't take your time. So David and I, before we became researchers in digital economy and all the issues around skills and labor, we used to be school teachers. And one thing that we do for a sleepy room is that to wake everyone up, we ask everyone to do some physical exercise. So everyone stand up and give me 10 push-ups. Okay, just kidding. So I hope that you all had an enjoyable lunch and a productive, or dare I say, a generative morning. Now, speaking of generative, all the AI and stuff, it is daunting, isn't it? That we are in an age where you cannot be sure if everything that you've heard today was written by GPT or not. How can you be sure if this logo was not designed by DALL-E or Midjourney? Right? And I think a more important question is, what will our children do? Or more precisely, how will our children be? Not just workers, but also people with meaningful life. And that links back to education, David, because education is a pillar, and education is also a foundation to prepare our children for that future. So then the question is, what models of education should we adopt? Is it a skill-based one, where we try to push everyone towards higher skilled jobs, everyone becoming an engineer? Or is it a more humanistic, a more wholesome model, where you prepare your children to cope with the hardships in life, and not just to become another programmer or software engineer? Now, with our interviews of over 500 interviews, actually a huge data set, we came to the conclusion that the latter model is more appropriate. However, what the interviews didn't show was how. How can a growth, a capability-based, a humanistic model of education, how can that be delivered? What kind of content, pedagogy that we should take, and who should deliver it. Is it schools? Is it parents, families? You know, it takes a village to raise a child. Is it your employers? And what is the role of government? Okay. And on that note, while it is, you know, daunting to reimagine education, we here in the research team also think that it is an exciting opportunity to reimagine education now, so that we can have a brighter future, or at least a more content and happier future, because nothing waits for us. GPT-5 is coming to your phone. And GPT can do multimodal data now, not just text. You want it to read a picture, to read a sign even upside down. I tried today before, it can now. And it can also do audio. So we cannot wait, we have to reimagine it now. And David and I are very happy that today we're joined by 3 wonderful panelists to help us on that journey of reimagination. So we're very happy to introduce Li Sheng from Singapore. We have Gahun from Korea, and joining us live, Raquel from Sweden. Very, very glad to have all of you here. So to start the session, I think Raquel, thank you very much for waking up early. Is it 7 a.m. in Sweden?
Yes, it is. It's
Okay.
7 a.m. And you know, in Sweden it's dark mostly, so
well,
it's
this time of year.
so yeah.
To give you a bit of context, Raquel works a lot with, you know, implementing AI into organizations around Sweden. So Raquel, we would like to start with you, you know, being the AI expert. From your experience, when introducing AI into organization, how has that led these organizations to change the way they think about skills, about work in their organization for the employees?
Thank you so much. And of course, it's a big question. And if we look at the maturity level of the organizations in Sweden, it's still very immature, so to say. People are starting to experiment and understand AI, and also try to understand how they are going to use it to create value. And so what we have mostly been doing is that we have been trying to kind of demystify AI, show what it actually can do, what capabilities it has, what are the strengths with this technology, and actually look at it as a technology, because that's really what it is. And we as humans can use it, but we need to understand it, to harness, you know, the potential of it.
So I read on AI Sweden website, Raquel, that one of the pillars for implementing AI into organization is culture. Okay, so can you talk more about that? You know, what kind of cultural change is necessary?
Yes. So what we have seen is that, you know, in order to kind of make use of the potential of the technology, there needs to be some bravery. And there also needs to be, you know, acceptance in the organizations for people to actually try and experiment. And how often do you encourage failure in your organization? It's not that often. So really you need to start to look at, you know, what do we want our leaders to do? What do we want our employees to do? And really encourage, you know, to explore. And this is absolutely a culture journey that organizations need to do. But also, you really need to reestablish the values that you have in your organization. And if you don't have the correct values, you know, how will you make sure that the people working in the organizations are actually creating or using AI for the benefit for the organization, or in many cases for the humanity? So the culture part is extremely important to move forward and to make use of the technology in the right way.
Okay, and values is a common word that we heard this morning, and we wish that it would have been more convenient for you to join us, from the beginning. So anyway, so you were talking about the values of helping humanity, helping people to better themselves, and how has your organization, how has AI Sweden assisted these organizations in finding out, or maybe not finding out, but enhancing, promoting that value on their journey of adopting AI?
So it's really a co-creation, actually, because we work with organizations as partners. And the nice thing about AI is that we are all on this journey together, transformational journey, and there's no one out there, I think, that knows exactly what is going to happen or has extensive experience around this field and how to integrate it in the organizations. So what we are doing is that we are learning together, and we are creating some trainings, we are creating some tools, we are asking questions, we are inviting thought leaders to share thoughts around how they are working with this. So it's mostly, about looking what is happening globally, what are competitive or progressive organizations doing, how are the universities taking this challenge on. So it's a lot about understanding together. So we do a lot of networking, we are implementing some projects together, not least in the municipalities, to kind of use this technology for good.
Okay, so co-creation, that is also something that we've been discussing all day. I'm
sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you, Raquel? Oh, okay. Could we check? Because Raquel is not hearing us anymore. Raquel?
I don't know what happened.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Is it okay now? Okay, okay, very good. Anyway, so I was saying co-creation is also a theme that we've been discussing today, bringing the bottom up, that kind of thing. So very quickly, because I would like to move on to the other two panelists, could you give us a specific example of a project that you've done, okay, that involves, multiple stakeholders, and how the co-creation journey has transpired, to give us a clearer idea of how we can do it and move forward?
Okay, so in large companies, we are using something that we call the maturity assessment tool, because we strongly believe that in order to move forward, you need to know where you are. So for that reason, we start with an assessment, and we look at different factors such as leadership, organization, technology, infrastructure, data, and it's actually a survey, and you send it out to the organization, and then you collect the answers, and you kind of build this team to discuss these different capabilities that need to be in place in order to create a mature AI organization. So from that starting point, you actually get an idea of where you're heading and where you want to be as an organization, because it's really important to create an ambition or a vision together, actually. From that starting point, you will know, where do you have the knowledge gaps in the organization, and then we start to build knowledge according to where you are heading, because otherwise, education for the sole purpose of education, it's not enough. You need to build towards something. And then you start to collect the ideas, because then people start to understand, okay, how can I use this technology to augment my own capabilities, the responsibilities that I have in the organization? And then the ideas come into place, and then you need to, further develop the ideas, and suddenly they become a project, internal AI project. And really, that's how long we have been working with organizations, we are in the implementation phase now, and we are looking at it to work with different projects in a systematic way. And that also requires some knowledge and skills from the leadership to actually do the correct assessment and prioritization. So that's kind of how we are building capabilities in organizations today.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Raquel. And I wish that you were here, because we're going to have workshops in the next 2 days. I mean, it would be wonderful to demonstrate that, in person, in the flesh, how the survey, then leads, how assessment then leads to training, then leads to adoption. Okay, so now I would like to move on to a new friend of mine from Korea, Mr. Gawun. We met just 2 days ago, and I'm trying to get him to let me taste some authentic soju, because in my country, in Vietnam, we don't have the real soju. I want the authentic 40-degree one. Okay, so Gawun. Yeah. Now, besides soju, we also talked a lot about job scarcity in Korea and where the country is heading in terms of employment and then the implications for that on education. And Gawun has painstakingly prepared for us a very long, well, I hope not so long, overview of the situation in Korea. So he's going to break down the employment situation, the education situation, and then what he thinks is the future for Korea. Also yours.
Okay, thank you. Before starting my comments, I have a question for you, audience. Do you know what is the real international language? English? International language. Do you know? Do you know? English? No. Body language? No. Broken English? Yes. So, I can speak broken English very, very fluently. But I won't use the normal English, supported by the AI translator. Yes, cooperation with AI, right? Okay. Anyway, I want to share my research result and the policy implications about the labor market, lifelong learning system, and workplace innovation in Korea. I believe that the demand for skill is just as important as the supply. If there is no demand for skills, there will be a surplus of skills, and it will be an unnecessary investment. Right? This is exactly what is happening in Korea. My empirical research shows that Korea has a very low demand for skills in the labor market and in the workplace. I don't know exactly what the situation is like in Singapore. I don't know. But the Korean example is instructive. Korea has the lowest share of high-skilled jobs in the OECD. Less than 30% of managerial and professional jobs are as high-skilled. I also measured how much people use their skills in the job, in the workplace, which is also the lowest in the OECD. In other words, the demand for skills is very low in Korea. I measured the human capital depreciation rate. And for this very reason, South Korea shows the highest figure among OECD countries. If I get a chance, I'd like to measure it for Singapore and compare. As I know, you have the same data. I used the TIAC data, OECD data. Okay. According to my measurement, the Korean workforce loses the human capital of a year of education after 4 years due to low skill demand. This means after 8 years in the workplace, employees in Korea actually need 2 years college education to regain the original human capital level. But this high rate of depreciation is actually a process of equilibrium. You lose those skills because you don't need them. If I sit in a chair without exercising at all, my brain decides that I don't need muscles, right? The same goes for intellectual capacity, cognitive skills. Same thing happened. If you don't use it, you lose it. Low skill demand, boring job or lousy job make human capital depreciation. High skill demand, challenging job, lovely job prevent human capital depreciation or improve human capital. In terms of human capital loss or gain, job quality is very, very important. Namely, skill is related to job quality closely. A good job is one that is in high demand for your skills and gives you the opportunity to use more of human capital you have accumulated. They give you more autonomy and discretion and have a horizontal organizational structure. In a hierarchical organization, you don't need a lot of skills because you just do what you are told, right? It is in Korean situation. You only need to be good at a very narrow area, right? This is the old model of skill accumulation. The desire to learn arises when you have autonomy and discretion, so you can be self-motivated to work and learn. Companies with this organizational culture, horizontal culture, also invest in training and education for their workers, which means that HRD in company, organizational culture go hand in hand. One more thing to emphasize is that the education and training provided by employer should be more general skill for the future. This is where government support comes in. Companies are naturally reluctant to invest in general skill because they want to make their own profit only. They are only interested in increasing their productivity, and they worry about the poaching from other companies. But the government should be interested in the well-being of its citizens, and its citizens are the workers in the companies. Government should allow the citizens or workers to develop a lifelong career, not only imminent vacancy skills for employer only. And the government makes its citizens play a variety of roles in the community. Foundation skill or cognitive skill is important to do this role. Government must give its own citizens this kind of human capital development opportunity. It is my point. The fourth industrial revolution, digital transformation age, in particular is characterized by rapid technological progress and uncertainty. To cope with this, the cognitive ability to learn something new is crucial. Companies may not be directly interested in this, but governments are different. We need to support people throughout their lives to improve their careers, move to better jobs, and learn new things, something new. Government can do this directly, or they can support companies to do this. This role of government is even more important for digital transformation. Finally, what job will be needed in the future? What areas will AI not be able to replace? Areas where labor, production, and consumption are separated are easy to automate using AI. This is the case in the manufacturing sector, where the time lag between production and consumption make it easy to use the automated AI machine. AI in particular in the different from other automated machine. For example, computers are very accurate but not human-like, 100% accurate. However, generative AI mimics the human very closely, but not accurate. It has a hallucination. Do you know hallucination? Yeah. Or inaccurate results. In this way, it is very human, right? So, in a sense, AI requires more human intervention than other automation techniques. If it is important decision maker, okay. If it is not important decision, like which restaurant is good for me, or which where I have to go in Singapore, I don't need very 100% accuracy level. In this case, human AI is very good for me. But you decide very, very important decision making. You need 100% accuracy. Generate AI very, very human-like. They can make a mistake, right? This cooperation between human being and generative AI shows a huge productivity improvement, causing job in this accurate higher level accurate field area. AI can't learn all human common sense. It is very, very important point. We don't call a banana a yellow banana, right? We call it just a banana, right? This common sense limits AI machine learning. Generative AI experience very difficulty. Oh, banana is yellow. I don't know. Just banana is in the data set, right? It's a common sense. This is why the complementarity between humans and AI is more productivity. It is very easy for us. Common sense is very easy, right? We don't think about. Anyway, AI needs human supervision and intervention, especially in important decision making and business activity. In other words, when using AI in the production process, there must be a time gap between production and consumption before it can be used. This is because quality control can be done through the human intervention. But, okay, 2 more. Thank you, 2 minutes. Yeah, but if labor is production and consumption happens as soon as production happens, automation is difficult using AI. Even if it is possible, it is expensive and low quality. There is such things as a service sector. Social skill will play an important role. Human will still have the edge in the face-to-face relationship. Kindness and ability to understand others will be important. Metacognition, the ability to understand yourself, myself, right, will also be important. Social skill and cognitive skill share almost the same area in your brain. Our cognition has evolved to think about what others think of me, think of us. Smart person is kind. As I remember, Singapore cognitive skill and social skill is not so high in international perspective based on PIAC data, which is fortunately skill used at the workplace is relatively very high, as I know, in international league table. Lifelong learning throughout institution should create smart people. Workplace need to be redesigned for their workers to be kinder. Government should support this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gawun. Now, this is actually the revised version of his speech. The original was much longer. But I read the original version yesterday. Luckily, I did. But in fairness, so the topics around job scarcity, labor, is something that Gawun resonates strongly with, because it is something that he is, he sees every day in his country. That's why he has prepared so much to speak. And one point in Gawun's, presentation is about government, and that links perfectly to our last panelist, Li Sheng, from the Singaporean government. So Li Sheng, so the first question that we would like to ask you is, have you seen, I mean, in your observation, have you seen any of the growth capability elements being delivered in Singaporean education at any levels?
Thank you, Berlin, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Li Sheng, and I cover higher education planning, master planning for the sector. Part of that includes the core curriculum. So definitely I see a lot of resonance in a good way with what was shared both by Professor David as well as this morning in the growth and capabilities model, and I think what the Singapore Ministry of Education is trying to do across all levels and stages of the education system. And this may come as a surprise to some who are used to thinking of Singapore as a very heavy on skills accumulation kind of a system, very good at acquiring, I don't know, science, math, PISA scores, and all of that. I think of these as technical skills that are rapidly changing, and so there is a part, I think, that we do need to keep pace with this. So I don't think it's a either or in a kind of a false dichotomy kind of way. I think it needs to be both and I'll return to this question of how do we keep up with rapidly changing technical skills needs later. But it is definitely not sufficient as a foundation, and the foundation that I think the Singapore Ministry of Education is working on is really on building up core human competencies. And what are these core human competencies? We can think about them in terms of 3 C's. Some of these are in the public statements that our ministry has put out recently. First is to be a creator. So the core skills cover things like being innovative, being able to innovate, solve problems that are not very structured, that you need to combine different types of intelligences, knowledge, and skills to do. Ability to learn, so learning agility, and to be self-directed in learning, not to sort of wait for someone to tell you what to do in a hierarchical system. So that's the first. Second is the ability to be connectors. We talked a lot about this in the morning, how to build trust with people, how to communicate, how to make your thinking and your decisions explainable, something that generative AI can't really do. How to have empathy, to understand the customer, and to build kinds of relationships that enable you to uncover new needs and create new value. And last but certainly not least, how to manage change, not just to manage change, but to lead change. This is very, very human. It involves all those things, right? Empathy, understanding how the people who need to change feel, building their trust in you. So connectors. And the last is to be contributors. I really like what Philip said right at the start. There was this element of the disposition, of being committed to something. And I think to be effective as lifelong learners, this is very key. This is the mindset part, right? We talked about it. The mindset, the disposition, and it needs a few things, right? It needs confidence that I can learn. It needs a sense of growth, that this is not sort of like demeaning for me that at this age and at this stage of my career to go back to learn. It's not. And there's a sense also in which it needs a certain level of what we call civic literacy, of saying that I want to contribute as a citizen to my society, to my community, national community, global community to solve these problems. This is my sense of purpose, and that's why I want to stick to this and pursue this and be committed to this. So I think these are aspects of, we have various names for the frameworks at different levels, 21st century competencies in schools. We have the life skills framework, which we also recently introduced in the IHLs, the Institutes for Higher Learning, and the critical core skills for adult learners. But this is where I think it resonates very much with me. Thank you.
And one follow-up question to that, and this one is very similar to something that we asked Raquel earlier. So could you give us just one example of how the 3 C's, or maybe just one of the 3, is being delivered in higher education? So for example, you can describe an activity that develops the 3 C's.
Sure. So the first thing is that we did not come up with a central curriculum and tell all the IHLs that you must implement this. Right? There's a lot of diversity, and so when we empowered the educators in the IHLs to say, looking at their different student profiles, their curriculum philosophy and strategy, how to do it. So that's one sort of example in and of itself. And I think what we see in many cases is they do it through applied and experiential learning, whether that is going overseas to get the global exposure to learn how to be global connectors, in the workplace itself, partnering with industry to have that sense of how do I innovate and solve a problem, a real problem that the industry is facing. Yeah.
And one last question for you, Li Sheng. So, given that in the future AI might take away jobs, even high-skilled one, because as Phil presented this morning, actually the middle level is safe, and then you aim at the knowledge economy being in danger. So what's the future? How might Singaporean higher education, or even more generally education, prepare our children to deal with that?
So I have two things on this. First is I think it actually goes beyond education in a way. We need a whole of society, multi-stakeholder sort of mindset change. And the way we're doing this is through the National Skills Future movement. So it's not just a sort of MOE thing, and it's not just a training provider, subsidies for courses thing. It really needs to be much more, I guess, pervasive, and that change is something that we call on partners across the whole spectrum of society. And so my second point has to do with partnering industry and employers, bringing them into this ecosystem. We're doing so, again, at all levels in a variety of ways, reaching out to say, would you like to partner schools, offer a learning experience for even our school students at your company, at your business, or if you want to go more in-depth, train students from the IHLs through work-study program modalities. And finally, I think to build workplace learning capabilities in your own organization, which, as you have heard already, requires a pretty big mindset change. L&D should not be seen as a cost, or people development should not be seen as a cost, or people should not be seen as a cost, but really as an investment, because you can go one or two ways, I think, as a business leader. You can say, this is my business model. I'm just going to make it as efficient as possible by taking out all the humans. But I don't think you're going to get very far, right? Because that business model is going to become very brittle, and you're going to be swept away quite fast by uncertain future disruptions. But if we say, I'm going to invest to unleash the learning potential of my workforce for value creation, because now they've got more time to do the human-to-human things, and innovation-driven growth. And that is my vision for my business. Because I too want to be a contributor. I too want to be my business to be a connector and a contributor. I think that is really, I think, the hope and the way forward as well. So employers to sort of be partners as well on this whole national journey.
Okay, thank you very much, Li Sheng. Now, of course, we have received a lot of questions from the audience, and many of these questions converge into one issue, and I think David, you would be the one to answer this. So a lot of questions here ask about what kind of pedagogies, like, should the growth model have.
That's a really good question, and I think this is on. Yeah, that's a really good question and something of vital importance. The first thing to say is, of course, what's been said before. We're very early in the journey. And I'd say that pedagogy thus far moves quite slowly worldwide. It shouldn't, it doesn't always, but on the whole it does. I think it's important to distinguish, first of all, between the idea that learning itself can be enhanced by digital means, and of course we see a lot of that around us. Some courses have been really vastly improved, where students are sharing their problem solving on Google Docs, for example. Or tutors, teachers are using various tools to make the processes more efficient. But I think what we've got at the moment is the possibility of AI becoming more of an assistant to those who teach, much more, a co-pilot for teachers, if you like, as well as for learners, And I think that's quite exciting, actually, provided there's sensible discussion and some safeguards where they're needed. The other thing about all that is that I do think that it overlaps with the curriculum in a rather large way. So I think that awareness of developments in this sort of field are an important item of curriculum themselves. I think I would use the word critical awareness, actually. I don't necessarily mean negative at all. Actually, I just mean that young people, older learners too, but young people in particular, should be learning about the implications of the digital world that is all around them more than they are. They're certainly learning to use the stuff, much quicker than I do. But that thing about as citizens appreciating every time you're giving information to somebody and what might be done with it, something as simple as that. So the sort of critical understanding of the developments, which overlaps curriculum and pedagogy, I think. So those are my first thoughts.
And also continuing on from pedagogy, a related question also in very high demand, David, is how should, and I guess this is also a question for Li Sheng, if you want to chime in, how should assessments change to accommodate for the new model?
I think this is, I mentioned in my talk that educational institutions pretty much the world over tend to be quite conservative. And that's partly because they're caught in systems which garner a lot of belief, not necessarily support, but kind of perhaps grudging support. I mean, I'll take the example of South Korea because they're as we heard in a conference in Singapore a year or so back, even the leader of lifelong learning, the national leader of lifelong learning in Singapore, in South Korea, acknowledges that there's not just a belief in exams, but they're a kind of fever in that country. Now what you've got there is an extreme example of something you see pretty much all over the world, especially in the more developed countries, which is that the school system has become locked into a fierce competition in increasingly the mistaken belief that that competition and the credentials it bears is the route to success in life. Now, that, as I was saying earlier, every day that's less true. And for many of those young people behind the figures you mentioned, Ga-woon, in South Korea, many of those young people are treading water. They've got their best high school, they've got their best university, but they haven't got a job. They're treading water because the right job isn't coming along and they don't want to sully their CV with an ordinary job. Absolutely outrageous. So that kind of waste needs to be confronted somehow. And I think that the way we treat some qualifications as gold standard because they're academic and respected is something that we all need to try to resolve together, in particular if governments can incentivize other kinds of qualifications, especially in a more variety of contexts. If you don't do so well at school, but you go to an employer that really does help you learn, that needs to be promoted, it needs to be recognized. So qualifications need to diversify.
Okay. And Li Sheng?
Before I go there, I just wanted to respond to something that David was saying, which was about the need to infuse, I guess, knowing about technologies as part of the curriculum. And I did say I was going to come back to how to sort of keep up, with the rapid sort of technical skills aspect. And I think one of the challenges there is also this question of what to learn. If we say we want to have a tighter nexus with industry demand and so on, is that because of this growing cone of uncertainty, even over how AI is actually going to affect jobs and the skills required, I think industry itself also would not be able to see very far, would not be able to know. And that's something that technology can probably help us with by sort of capturing signals, weak signals, early signals from data faster. And so we had, I think, Gavin in the morning talked about job skills insights, which is something that my colleagues at Skills Future Singapore are working hard on and getting out there. Second question on was it testing, assessment? Okay. So I think every education system, the question is, have learning outcomes been achieved, right? And even for you as educators, you can't move away from that. And I think when we talk about competencies that matter, that it's going to be important and relevant still. But I think a lot of it is going to be more in terms of your demonstrated competence in various settings, and not so much about reducing it to a certain score in an examination. And I think going forward, when we talk about things like proficiency levels, they are much broader. It's like you have met the learning outcome. You don't need to have to reduce it to a score to compare you to your classmate or something like that. And actually that's how it works in the workplace, right? Because in no interview that I've been, nor that I have conducted, do I ask people what their grades in school were. It is not relevant to the discussion, right? It's more about like, let me see your competency about, say, human-to-human contact with me in a conversation in this interview, and let's see how we go from there. Why don't you do a skills test for me? Can you sort of like, and so on. Yeah, so that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you, Li Sheng. And Raquel, coming back to you, there's a question I think tailored to you. And we can see, Raquel, that it is getting lighter and lighter on your side. So the sun is rising. So Raquel, what do you think is the role of number one, industry, and organizations like yours in driving a growth model of education, right? And number two, what's the role of learning on the job in a growth-based education future?
When it comes to the first question, I think that organizations are actually leaning more and more towards, seeing knowledge as an asset, and the organizations need to be better at taking care of that asset and actually build on the capabilities that are needed in order to keep them competitive in the market. As you have been mentioning, we are moving globally all the time. We are not only working in Europe or in Sweden. We need to look at it from an international perspective. So I think I'm seeing trends from organizations that they are starting to look at knowledge and knowledge development as a core asset. But in order to to create that, you need to have a strategy around that. And that's where I'm seeing that organizations need to take a much firmer step in creating those kind of strategies. And the second question, can you please repeat it?
What's the role of on-the-job, learning? We're talking about professional development.
I can't hear you. Sorry.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the second question was, what's the role of on-the-job training, like professional development, in that growth-based education in the future?
Yes. So you were mentioning about, using AI as assistant. And for really using that technology as an assistant, you need to be the expert. So when looking at organizations, we are, and people, we are creating domain experts. And it's with that expertise you will be able to use the technology to really create value. But so you really need to foster in that kind of learning and knowledge and develop that. And you need to understand what is the core knowledge that we need to have in our organization. So otherwise we will only be using, AI to respond, and then we become obsolete. So it's absolutely crucial that we continue to build on expertise and domain experts.
Okay, thank you very much, Raquel. And in these questions from the audience, Raquel, there is one. Have you seen any organizations that's promoting, growth-based, capability-based education with digitalization on the side? So I think I think I should direct the inquirer to your organization, and then I guess a chat later on would be very fruitful.
Yes,
Okay, and
for sure.
again, and appreciate whoever asked that question. Now, I also want to share something on my side. Actually, two things with regards to growth, education, and more generally, a human-centric mode of work in the future. So I had a wonderful conversation with my valued colleague, Mr. Johnny Sung. He is in the audience, so I want to give a shout out to him. Always wonderful to have a conversation with Johnny. So, first of all, education. Now, we did a lot of interviews, so a substantial part of the data for this project was collected from Vietnam. Phil and I and David went around Saigon talking to various firms. And one thing that we noticed in my country is that there seems to be a very, very strong emphasis on human among the employers. And we only talked to C-levels and director of HR. We're not talking about line management. We're talking about the very top. So executives in Vietnam, they try not to fire people and replacing them with technology unless absolutely necessary. And part of the reason why this is so, and we asked them, so it appears that the cultural dimension plays a lot into whether technology augments or replaces people. So the C-levels and the HR directors that we talked to, they gave us a sense of, okay, so before I do anything, and not just technology, by the way, anything, any change in the firm, before any change happens, we look at the person in front, we look at the person to the left, to the right, and the person behind, before we make a decision. And if that affects people, then we try to minimize it. So why does education play into this? And why does culture play into this? Now, this is my theory, or rather, this is our theory. We haven't had the time to prove it, with empirical data. So the theory is family education. And this is something that we haven't mentioned since early morning. So in Vietnam, when you're a child, and you walk into your neighbor's home, or you walk into a relative's home, your parents will make sure that you greet everyone before you sit down. And when you dine with other people, your parents will make sure that you invite everyone to eat before you eat. And you will eat the last because you're the youngest. And then when you go to school, what happens? When you go to school, now some people will debate me on the merits, or rather the risk of this. But this is a bit of an oxymoron. There is a very clear blurriness between the professional and the personal sphere in Vietnamese schools. So teachers and students are very close to each other. So if you're a school teacher in Vietnam, every new year you'll have, I don't know, like 100 people visiting your home. Those are students. They will cook for you, you will cook for them, and you guys will gamble together. Sometimes money is involved. Well, I know, we Asians, we love gambling, like mahjong and all other stuff. And that relationship carries throughout your life. 30 years later, those same students, now successful people, now with family, will come back to you, cook for you, you cook for them, and you gamble, but now with bigger money. And when you go to work, you simply replace teacher with boss. Same thing happens. Now, why do we have that kind of education? And why do we have that kind of culture? Again, I don't know. My theory is that we have been fighting so much in Vietnam because we've been invaded non-stop in our history. So maybe, okay, I'm not a historian, again, please don't quote me on this. So maybe we have nobody to rely on but our family and our neighbors. So that's one thing that we discovered in Vietnam. So the culture dimension. Now, the second thing that I want to add to our discussion here is that, yes, technology is important, but we should not forget about business model. So even before AI, right, jobs have already been scarce in some places in the world, especially in developed countries. Like even before AI, we have had tons of problems with skills and employment and depreciation of skills. You know, you go to work, actually you get dumber and dumber. So that's business model. And more generally, economic model, and even more generally, ideology and the way we look at life. So technology is in the end just a tool. And that tool can serve, you know, many models. So whether we choose a human-centric model or non-human-centric model, I think that has to come first. And that model might be and will be very likely driven by culture and education. And the first kind of education that you get is family education. More than schools, more than higher education, more than further education. So those are the 2 points I want to add. And that also, we have 50 seconds left. So, so this panel has been keeping time very well. And I think we should also wish Raquel to have a nice and enjoyable breakfast, Raquel. Okay, back to your time.
Thank you. On a very interesting note. Thank you for that. I won't dare to summarize what you guys spoke about, but the only thing I'll say is, as a org design practitioner, organization design practitioner and teacher, I was fascinated by what you said about how hierarchical organizations actually dumb people down, and how the need of the hour is to have flat structures as a way of bringing autonomy to people and therefore skilling them up. So thank you so much. I learned a lot from you. Wonderful. Can we have the question, the reflection question up on the screen? And would you folks like to respond to it? How confident are you that education, training, and lifelong learning institutions can adequately prepare learners for the future of work in light of the fourth industrial revolution? Well, as a panel, you certainly inspired confidence. Because we have more than 70% of the people who are saying they're at least neutral or moderately confident, and a good 50+% saying they're moderately confident or very confident. That's really good news, considering that we started the discussion and your presentation, David, with thoughts around how education really needs to change itself and become much more holistic and integrated in the way it's both pedagogically constructed as well as delivered. So on that happy note, we can take a break. Post-lunch is never easy, but you guys have been an amazing audience. I haven't seen anyone dropping off to sleep. I was looking around, you know. But no, you did well, so you deserve a coffee. Let's take a coffee break, and we'll come back at 3:20. Meanwhile, could you please take the photograph for the panel? 3:20, please. Thank you.
No, it's those that I want to get rid of. They're someone else's. This is mine. That's great. Thank you. Fabulous.
Right, I need to go to the loo now.
Only you can answer.
Thank you.